When I first joined Bellamark Creative, a mid-sized boutique marketing agency downtown, I thought I'd struck gold. A stylish office, a coffee machine that didn't spit tar, and a reputation for sharp campaigns that actually won awards. As a fresh marketing coordinator, I was determined to prove myself. I was assigned to work under Clara Hastings, Senior Content Manager. Clara had a reputation in the office. People described her as exacting or detail-oriented, though I'd later learn that was just polite office code for micromanaging to a psychotic degree. At first, I admired her confidence. Crisp suits, perfect hair, that cold grace of someone who always seemed 10 steps ahead. My first task was straightforward: draft a short email update to one of our long-term clients, a brand relaunch announcement with a few bullet points and a friendly tone. I triple-checked everything and formatted the email in Arial, 12 points, with polite spacing. Professional and readable. I emailed it to Clara for approval, thinking, this should take 5 minutes tops. Wrong. 10 minutes later, she replied with, "Please change the font to Times New Roman, size 13.5. Also, set line spacing to exactly 1.15. Okay. Bit unusual, but I made the edits. 5 minutes after that. Actually, make it Calibri. Try 12.75 instead. Also, indent the first sentence of each paragraph." Wait, what? I didn't even know you could do 12.75 in Outlook. But I found a workaround using Word, copied it back into Gmail, and sent the updated version. Then came another response. Calibri feels too clinical. Can we try Georgia instead? And perhaps a softer line spacing, maybe 1.12? That's when I knew I'd entered a world of madness. What followed was an hour-long descent into a typographical hellscape. Clara treated this one email like it was being submitted for a design exhibition at the Louvre. The font switched over 100 times. Some instructions contradicted previous ones within the same thread. Make the body font 12.3. Never mind, go back to 12.5, it had better energy. Now it feels crowded. Increase padding. Actually, can you make the line spacing feel more optimistic? Yes, she said, optimistic. I stared at my screen, wondering how a font could have emotions. I tried to push back once, gently. Hey Clara, just to clarify, are we locked in on the font now? I've made a few rounds and want to make sure we're aligned before finalizing. She responded within seconds. Design is fluid. Attention to detail is the job. If that's not your thing, this may not be the right fit. That stung. I kept my mouth shut. I stayed late that evening trying to make sense of her vision. At some point, I was dragging font boxes like a sleep-deprived graphic designer from 1998. I hadn't done any real work that day. Just moved pixels, changed serif families, and adjusted invisible spacing between commas. By 9 p.m., I was still stuck on an email that, ironically, no one but the client's assistant was even going to read. But I learned something important that day: this wasn't about fonts. This was about control. Clara didn't want perfection. She wanted obedience. And from that moment on, I started taking notes. After the fontpocalypse, I expected things to calm down. Maybe Clara was just having a bad day. Maybe she'd move on to some other unlucky intern. Or maybe, just maybe, she'd realized that making someone change a 7-line email over 100 times was overkill. Nope. That email was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Clara escalated her micromanagement into an art form of cruelty. Every task I submitted was returned, not for factual errors or poor writing, but for nonsense like, "This sentence doesn't sound like a Thursday. Make the header smile more. This deck needs to feel taller." I wish I were exaggerating. It didn't matter if I followed her exact instructions, somehow, I was always wrong. If she said, use blue, and I used blue, she'd say, too obvious. I meant more of a blue-adjacent tone, like melancholy. She was like a walking, talking mood board that never committed to a single idea. It wasn't just fonts anymore. It was spacing. Alignment. The weight of punctuation. She once made me change all the bullet points in a presentation to dashes, then back to bullets, then to numbered lists, then said the numbered lists were too aggressive. One day, she spent 30 minutes telling me that the "and" in our slide deck looked passive and demanded I find one that felt more dominant. So I started documenting. I created a secret folder on my desktop titled The Clara Files. Inside, I stored every bizarre request, every conflicting directive, every humiliating comment she made on my work. Each email thread was labeled with keywords. fonts_of_madness.pdf. smiling_headers_saga.docs. taller_deck_drama.pptx. comma_crisis_v3.xlsx. I didn't stop there. I started keeping a log in a spreadsheet. Date. Task. Number of edits. Type of feedback. Level of absurdity, ranked 1 to 10. Notes. Screenshots. It wasn't just for revenge, not yet. At first, it was for sanity. I needed to reassure myself that this wasn't normal. That I wasn't imagining it. That I wasn't losing my grip on reality because a middle manager believed certain fonts emitted different auras. But the turning point came one Tuesday afternoon. We were preparing a small campaign brief, something meant to be quick. Clara had me rewrite the intro 16 times because she claimed the phrase, "hello again," sounded too clingy. I laughed. I thought she was joking. She wasn't. When I hesitated on version 17, she leaned across her desk and said, "No," whispered, with the most serious face. "If you can't make an email breathe confidence, then you're not ready to speak on behalf of this brand." It wasn't just condescending. It was surreal. It was like working for someone who believed emails were living creatures with lungs, emotions, and self-esteem issues. That night, I added a new sheet to my tracker called Quotes from the Font Dictator. We don't just send words. We send experiences. This font doesn't reflect our vertical. The spacing here says desperate. That's not our brand. I even added a most absurd moment of the day column. For my mental health. But something else was happening. Others started noticing. A coworker in creative design casually asked me during lunch, "Hey, has Clara ever made you redo the same slide 20 times over the angle of a drop shadow?" A strategist mentioned that Clara once rejected their report because the PDF tasted cold. I wasn't alone. Clara had been quietly terrorizing everyone, just in different flavors of madness. That's when I realized, this wasn't just personal. It was a pattern. A pattern I now had proof of. And I was going to use it. By week 6, the nightmare had evolved. Clara wasn't just correcting grammar or nitpicking layout anymore. She was inventing new rules that didn't exist in any design or communication guide. She demanded we follow emotional alignment standards for emails, her words, not mine, and created color coding systems based on reader moods. No one knew what those moods were. She didn't explain. She just knew when something felt wrong. It was draining. One Monday, I spent 3 hours adjusting a client's FAQ page because she claimed the question marks were too defensive. Another time, she rejected a perfectly usable chart because she didn't like the energy of the y-axis. But here's where it got interesting. At our bi-weekly team meeting, the kind where upper management joins, Clara liked to show off her leadership. She'd present team highlights, announce upcoming goals, and subtly take credit for everyone's work. It was annoying, but we let her have it. Until one day, she crossed a line. She pulled up the infamous 100 edits email and said, with a rehearsed smile, "I had to guide this one a lot, but it turned out well in the end. Great growth moment for our junior staff." I sat there, stunned. She used me as an example of a learning process, when in reality, she had dragged me through formatting hell for 8 hours just to satisfy her whims. And now she was presenting it as her triumph? That was when something snapped. I glanced down at my laptop. The folder, Clara Files, was glowing like a beacon. I had screenshots. Revision history. Timestamps. Quotes. A full spreadsheet with over 300 logged entries. She had handed me the moment I was waiting for, a public stage, an audience that included her boss, and a document trail longer than a Game of Thrones script. So I made a plan. Step 1, organize the madness. I worked late that night, compiling everything. I color-coded the spreadsheet. I added tabs. One for font changes, one for tone comments, one for irrelevant rewrites. I created a section for contradictory directives, like when she told me to use Helvetica for a modern feel, then scolded me for not using Garamond because it's what the client expects. Then I made a presentation deck. Just 5 slides. Clean. Professional. Brutal. Slide 1, clarifying expectations, the evolution of a single email. Slide 2, timeline of changes, timestamps plus screenshots. Slide 3, total changes, 103. Words actually changed, 12. Slide 4, key phrases used, too confident, not confident enough, try neutral confidence. Slide 5, conclusion, the process is broken. Let's streamline for efficiency. No personal attacks. No sarcasm. Just facts. Step 2, the bait. The next day, I sent Clara a message. "Hey, I've been thinking a lot about process clarity lately. Would love to get your thoughts on something I've been working on around workflow efficiency." She responded instantly. "Great initiative. Let's bring it up in the next team sync. Perfect opportunity to show leadership." Perfect. She had no idea. Wednesday arrived, and with it came our team's bi-weekly sync, the one where Clara liked to bask in the artificial glow of her self-created empire. The Zoom call began at exactly 10 a.m., with a cheerful greeting from our department head, Mr. Callahan, followed by a few updates on quarterly goals. Clara was up next. Dressed sharply in a cobalt blazer and wearing her signature icy smile, she launched into her usual slideshow about team wins and growth through precision. She congratulated one team member for thinking outside the box by using an animated bullet point. Another for their consistent enthusiasm in meetings. I knew what was coming. Sure enough, she reached a slide titled Development Moments, and up came the email. My email. "This piece took some extra polishing," Clara said smoothly, "but it was a great growth experience for our coordinator. I think we all learned something about the importance of aesthetic discipline." I didn't flinch. Mr. Callahan nodded politely. A few teammates glanced sideways, unsure whether to smile or wince. And that's when I raised my hand. "Actually, if I may, I've been tracking some of our revision patterns for efficiency, and I'd love to share a few insights." Clara blinked, surprised, but nodded. "Sure. Please keep it brief." Game on. I shared my screen and clicked through the first slide. Slide 1, the evolution of an email, a study in process. This is a simple email sent to a long-standing client, one that required 103 revisions over a 6-hour window. What I've compiled here is not just the count of changes, but the nature of the feedback provided and how it affected overall productivity. A few people shifted in their seats. I saw curiosity and recognition in their eyes. Slide 2, changelog breakdown. Timestamps. Screenshot snippets. Font changes. Line spacing edits. At one point, Clara had asked me to change the font from Georgia to Garamond, then to Calibri, then back to Georgia, all in the span of 15 minutes. Each change was logged. You'll see here that many were reversed repeatedly, based on subjective aesthetic judgment rather than brand standards or client requests. I heard someone chuckle quietly. Mr. Callahan leaned in. Slide 3, quotes that shaped the process. I read aloud, keeping my tone neutral. Try making the font feel more Tuesday. Calibri feels like a dentist waiting room. Too assertive, this punctuation needs humility. By this point, the chat box was lighting up with private messages. My coworkers were loving it. Slide 4, the cost of micromanagement. I showed a side-by-side, my original draft, polished, clean, typo-free, versus the final version, which looked nearly identical except for the font, spacing, and a word moved from line 3 to line 4. Total words changed, 12. Total edits made, 103. Clara stiffened. She tried to interject. I think we're veering off topic. But Mr. Callahan raised a hand. Let him finish. Clara's lips thinned. Slide 5, a better way forward. I closed with solutions, not vengeance. A proposed template system. Clear formatting rules. A decision matrix for edits. A policy limiting subjective feedback rounds to 2 per document unless there's a critical error. This isn't about blame. It's about reclaiming time, respecting talent, and creating a system where creativity isn't strangled by unpredictability. Silence. Then, applause. No exaggeration. Mr. Callahan actually clapped. Then a few others followed. That, he said, was the most useful 5 minutes of process analysis I've seen all quarter. Clara sat frozen, hands tight in her lap, staring at her own reflection in the Zoom thumbnail like she didn't recognize the person looking back. When the meeting ended, I closed my laptop and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for days. But the fallout, the real change, was just beginning. The day after the presentation, the office buzzed with quiet energy, the kind that hums after a storm but before the sky clears. I walked into a round of subtle nods and secretive smiles. People who barely acknowledged me before now gave me encouraging pats on the back, as if I had done something heroic by simply stating the obvious: we were wasting time living under a font dictatorship. Clara, on the other hand, was visibly rattled. Her perfectly pressed appearance had frayed slightly at the edges. Her smile was tighter. Her usually assertive walk through the office now had a hesitance to it, as if each step reminded her that her iron grip had slipped, and everyone knew it. But she didn't retaliate. Not openly. Instead, she went quiet. No comments on font size that week. No contradictory feedback loops. She even approved one of my email drafts without edits, an act that sent our graphic designer into a half-joking panic. Are we in a simulation? Did Clara just say, "Looks good," and move on? But the silence was temporary. That Friday, I received an email titled "Restructure Update, Confidential." It was from HR. They had scheduled private check-ins with several team members to discuss collaborative workflow challenges and departmental culture. I wasn't surprised when they asked for my folder of documentation, the infamous Clara files. I didn't embellish anything. I didn't attack her character. I simply submitted the log, the screenshots, and the absurd quotes, all time-stamped, calmly catalogued, and tragically real. A week later, Clara was no longer in charge of our team. The official announcement was vague. Clara will be transitioning into a new role focusing on cross-departmental strategy. Translation: she was moved upstairs to a desk with no direct reports and no power to change anyone's font. We got a new manager, Darren, a former creative director who believed in templates, autonomy, and actual deadlines. The first thing he said in our welcome meeting? "I don't care if it's Arial or Calibri, as long as the message hits. We're here to communicate, not create existential font crises." The team erupted in laughter. And just like that, the air felt different. Lighter. I finally had time to do real work again: strategy decks, content campaigns, client pitches. I flourished. In a few months, Darren nominated me for a junior leadership development program. I led my first client workshop. I started mentoring the new hires. And every time I opened a fresh email, I chuckled a little to myself before typing the first word. Not because I was traumatized, but because I had survived. I kept the original email, the one Clara made me edit 103 times. It's framed on my desk now. In Comic Sans, 48 points bold, fluorescent green. A reminder of how ridiculous things can get, and how standing up for sanity, even with a spreadsheet and 5 slides, can shift the course of your career. And when new interns ask what to expect at Bellamark Creative, I always smile and say, "Here, we don't fear fonts anymore. We just tell the damn story."